Tuesday afternoon. 34,000 feet above Indiana. A Boeing 737 with 222 passengers, smoke pouring through the instrument panel, both pilots unconscious. And the only voice on the radio was a child's. This is what happened. The first thing you need to know is that nobody noticed her boarding. She was easy to miss. Small for her age, maybe 4.5 feet tall, maybe 70 pounds on a heavy day. She wore a faded green hoodie with a patch on the left sleeve that said Mills Aviation in cracked iron-on letters. Her jeans had a tear on the right knee. Her sneakers were old. She carried a backpack that was covered, every inch of it, in hand-drawn airplanes. Sketched in ballpoint pen. Detailed. Accurate. The kind of drawings that take time. She was 11 years old. Her boarding pass said, Sarah Mills. Seat 12A. Unaccompanied minor. Boston to Chicago. The gate agent checked her paperwork, gave her the standard unaccompanied minor packet with the lanyard and the bright orange sticker on her jacket, and pointed her toward the jetway. Sarah walked onto the aircraft alone. She chose the window seat automatically. She always chose the window seat. Not to watch the clouds. To watch the engines. To listen to them spool up. To feel the moment the aircraft's weight transferred from wheels to wings. She pressed her forehead against the cold plastic of the window as the 737 pushed back from the gate. The businessman in 12B glanced at her once. Saw the orange unaccompanied minor sticker. Assumed divorced parents or a grandparent visit or something ordinary like that. He went back to his phone. He had no idea. None of them did. What nobody on that flight knew. 3 years before this Tuesday afternoon, Sarah Mills had been a different kind of girl. She had been a girl with a father. Robert Mills had been a bush pilot for 22 years. He flew cargo routes in Alaska, supplies to remote villages, medicine to places roads couldn't reach. He flew a Cessna 208 out of a small airstrip 40 minutes outside Fairbanks. He knew those mountains the way some people know their own kitchen. He had started teaching Sarah to fly when she was 6 years old. Not officially. Not with any paperwork. Just, here, put your hands on the yoke. Feel what the aircraft is doing. Don't fight it. Listen to it. By the time Sarah was 7, she could take off, maintain altitude, and land on a grass strip. Not perfectly. But she could do it. Then one February, a storm came in faster than the forecast said it would. Robert was flying a supply run. He tried to turn back. The mountains didn't give him enough room. Sarah was at school when the principal came to get her from class. She already knew before the principal said a word. She went to live with her uncle. Frank Mills was Robert's younger brother. He was 51 years old, a retired regional airline pilot who had flown Embraer 145s for a commuter carrier out of Boston for 18 years before his knees gave out and he moved to a small house in western Massachusetts with a garage, a vegetable garden, and a 1974 Cessna 172 in a rented hangar at a small regional airport 20 minutes away. He had no children. He had never been married. He had a dog named Propeller and a coffee maker that he treated with more care than most people treat their cars. When Sarah arrived with one suitcase and her father's old aviation logbook, Frank didn't try to fill the silence with words. He just made her dinner. A month after she moved in, he asked her one question. Do you want to keep flying? She had looked at him for a long time. Yes, she said. It was the first full word she'd spoken in 3 weeks. Okay, Frank said. We'll keep it quiet. Just between us. And so they flew. Every weekend, weather permitting, and sometimes when the weather wasn't perfect because Frank believed you learned more in imperfect weather. He taught her the way Robert had started, by feel first, instruments second. He taught her stalls and recovery. Crosswind landings. Emergency procedures. Engine failures at altitude. He taught her because she needed it. Because when she was in the air, something in her face changed. The tightness went away. She was home up there. By the time she was 10, she had 140 hours. By 11, the Tuesday of Flight 1142, she had 190 hours in the Cessna 172. She had never been near a Boeing 737. But she knew the sky. And on that Tuesday afternoon in late October, the sky was about to need her. Transatlantic Airways Flight 1142 left Boston Logan at 1:52 p.m. 222 passengers. 6 crew. A Boeing 737-800, 9 years old, well-maintained, no outstanding issues on the maintenance log. Captain David Morris was 54 years old. He had 20,000 hours. He had flown 737s for 16 of his 26 years at the airline. He had a daughter starting college in the spring and a dog he was training to stop chewing the mail. First Officer James Parker was 38. 9,000 hours. He and Morris had flown together a dozen times. They had a comfortable rhythm. They didn't need to talk much. They communicated in the shorthand of pilots who know each other's habits. The first hour was normal. Clear air. Light turbulence over western Massachusetts that smoothed out by the time they crossed into New York State. Autopilot holding the aircraft steady at 34,000 feet. Both pilots relaxed but attentive. Morris was drinking coffee. Parker was reviewing the arrival weather for O'Hare. In row 12, Sarah had her father's logbook on her tray table. Not reading it. Just touching it. The cover was worn soft as cloth from years of handling. She was listening to the engines. She always listened to engines. 1 hour and 19 minutes into the flight. Morris smelled it first. Not smoke, not yet, something electrical. The particular sharp chemical smell of insulation getting too hot. Subtle. Easy to miss. He didn't miss it. You smell that? Parker lifted his nose. Yeah. Yeah, I do. They looked at each other. Morris keyed the interphone. Cabin crew, this is the captain. We may have a minor electrical issue. Please check the forward galley and report. Flight attendant Karen Wells, 15 years, calm by nature, checked the forward galley. Nothing visible. She reported back. Morris and Parker began working through the electrical abnormal checklist. Systematic. Professional. This was what training was for. Then the smoke started. Not a dramatic rush of it. A thin haze, almost a shimmer, rising from the base of the instrument panel on the captain's side. Like heat off summer pavement, except it wasn't heat. Smoke in the cockpit, Morris said. Flat. Controlled. He reached for his oxygen mask. Parker did the same. This was procedure. They had trained for this. What they hadn't trained for, what nobody trains for because it is so specific, so unlikely, was what happened next. The smoke was coming from the avionics bay. The fire, still small, still contained, had found a cable bundle that ran to 3 navigation systems simultaneously. Not the primary instruments. The secondary and backup navigation computers. One by one, 3 screens went dark. Morris noticed the loss of the second navigation system at the same moment he noticed something else. His oxygen mask had a seal problem. A hairline crack in the rubber seal around the left side of his face. Invisible during the pre-flight check. Invisible during normal operations. Not invisible now. Carbon monoxide from the burning insulation was getting through. Not much. Just enough. Morris did not know this was happening. That was the nature of it. Carbon monoxide didn't announce itself. He just felt, slowly and then less slowly, like something was pulling him away from the cockpit. James, he said. His voice was strange. Thick. Parker looked at him. David. Hey. David. Morris's hands slipped from the controls. Parker grabbed the yoke with both hands. He keyed the radio immediately. Chicago Center, Transatlantic 1142, we have smoke in the cockpit and the captain is incapacitated. Declaring emergency. We need vectors for immediate landing. Chicago Center responded within 4 seconds. Transatlantic 1142, roger your emergency. Turn left heading 270, descend and maintain flight level 280. Emergency equipment will be standing by. What's your souls on board? 222 souls, Parker said. I need the closest suitable airport, I have navigation system degradation. Understand. Chicago O'Hare is your closest option, 87 miles. Turn left now. Parker turned left. The aircraft banked. And here is where the sequence of events became what it became, because in the bank, with the smoke thickening slightly and his attention split between the unconscious captain, the degraded instruments, the radio, and the controls, Parker made a small input error. He overcorrected the bank. The 737 rolled past 30 degrees. 40. 45. At 34,000 feet, an unusual attitude. Parker caught it. He corrected. He was good. He pulled the aircraft back to wings level. But in the recovery, the aircraft lurched. A sharp movement. Parker's head came forward and then snapped back against the side window frame. His vision went white. Then gray. Then nothing. Both pilots were down. The aircraft, with no input, began a slow, steady descent. Autopilot partially functional, it was holding the wings level, maintaining the last heading Parker had set, but with the navigation systems degraded and neither pilot conscious, it was flying toward the ground at 800 feet per minute. 222 people. Smoke still in the cockpit. 34,000 feet above Indiana. Controller Beth Lawson had been at her scope for 2 hours when Transatlantic 1142's transponder started behaving wrong. Altitude, dropping. Slowly but consistently. The aircraft had been cleared to flight level 280 during the descent. It was now passing through 320. And the radio had gone quiet. She called. Transatlantic 1142, Chicago Center. No answer. She called again. No answer. The aircraft kept descending. Beth had 17 years of experience. She had handled engine failures, medical emergencies, a decompression event, a mid-air collision report that turned out to be a near miss. She was not a person who panicked. But her hands were very still on her console. Transatlantic 1142, if you read Chicago Center, squawk ident. The transponder didn't respond. She escalated immediately. Supervisor on the floor within 90 seconds. Adjacent sector cleared. Military notification started. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through. Beth's supervisor, standing behind her, heard it at the same moment she did. They looked at each other. Because the voice on the radio was a child's. Sarah. She had smelled it from row 12. That was the first thing, the smell. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. She knew that smell. Frank had taught her what electrical smoke smelled like. Had actually burned a piece of wire insulation in a coffee can in the hangar once, so she would know it by memory. That smell in a cockpit means one thing, he had said. It means something is on fire that isn't supposed to be. She had looked up from her father's logbook. The businessman in 12B had his headphones on. The woman across the aisle was asleep. Nobody else seemed to notice. 3 minutes later, the flight attendant call went out over the PA. Karen Wells' voice was professional. Steady. But Sarah heard what was underneath it. If there is anyone on board with aviation experience, a pilot, a flight engineer, anyone with aircraft systems knowledge, please identify yourself to a member of the cabin crew immediately. The cabin started to react. Confused voices. A child crying 2 rows back. A man asking loudly what was happening. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt. The businessman in 12B looked up. "Hey, kid, you need to." Sarah was already in the aisle. She walked forward. Steady. Not running. Running didn't help anything. Karen Wells saw her coming. Saw the orange unaccompanied minor sticker. Started to redirect her. Sarah said, "I've been flying since I was 6 years old. My father was a bush pilot. My uncle is a retired airline pilot and he's been teaching me for 3 years. I have 190 hours. I know what that smell is and I know it's coming from the cockpit and I need to get in there right now." Karen stared at her. The second flight attendant, Michael Torres, appeared at Karen's shoulder. He had heard. "She's a child," he said. "I know," Karen said. She looked at Sarah. This small girl in a green hoodie. The patch on her sleeve, Mills Aviation. The logbook visible in her hand. The complete absence of panic in her eyes. Karen had been flying for 15 years. She had a sense for people. You developed it in this job, you had to. She made a decision that she would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. "Come with me," she said. It was worse than Sarah had expected. Not chaos, something worse than chaos. A kind of terrible stillness. Both pilots unconscious. Captain Morris slumped in his seat. James Parker against the side panel, his oxygen mask askew, a thin smear of blood on the window frame where his head had hit. Smoke, not thick, not blinding, but present. A haze. And the smell was heavier in here. Sarah looked at the instrument panel. She did what Frank had taught her, start with the big picture. Altitude. Attitude. Airspeed. Don't let the details swallow you before you know what the aircraft is doing. Altitude, 31,400 feet. Descending. Attitude, wings level, nose slightly low. Airspeed, 284 knots. The autopilot was on, she could see the status light, but the aircraft was descending because nobody had programmed an altitude hold into the degraded system. "Okay," she said quietly, to herself, the way Frank had taught her to talk herself through problems. "Okay. First thing. Stop the descent." She climbed into the captain's seat. It was like climbing into something designed for a different species. The seat was enormous. Her feet didn't come close to the rudder pedals. The yoke was far away. Everything was bigger, heavier, more complex than the Cessna. She found the seat controls. Moved it as far forward as it went. Sat at the very edge. Her feet touched the pedals. Not perfectly. But enough. She found the autopilot altitude selector. Set it to 31,000 feet and engaged altitude hold. The descent stopped. The aircraft leveled. She let out one breath. Just one. Then she found the radio. The radio was familiar. Different panel, but the same logic. She had used a radio since she was 7. She picked up the mic. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Transatlantic Airways Flight 1142. Both pilots are incapacitated. I have control of the aircraft. My name is Sarah. I'm 11 years old and I need help." She released the mic. 3 seconds of static. Then Beth Lawson's voice, professional, controlled, with something underneath it that Sarah would only understand later was barely contained shock. "Transatlantic 1142, this is Chicago Center. Say again who is speaking." "My name is Sarah Mills," Sarah said. "I'm 11. I'm a passenger. I've been flying small aircraft for 3 years. Both pilots are unconscious. The aircraft was descending. I've leveled it at 31,000 feet using the autopilot. There's smoke in the cockpit from what I think is an avionics fire. I need to talk to someone who knows this aircraft. Please. A pause. Shorter than it felt. Sarah, this is Chicago Center. We copy you. We are getting you help right now. You are not alone. Can you tell me your current heading? Sarah looked at the compass. 270 degrees. That's good. You're heading west, toward Chicago. You're going the right direction. Help is coming. Stay on this frequency. Behind Sarah, Karen Wells stood in the cockpit doorway. She had tears on her face and she wasn't aware of them. His phone rang at 3:17 p.m. He was in the garage, changing the oil on his truck. His hands were black with grease. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. Frank Mills? Yes. Mr. Mills, this is Robert Hayward with the FAA Emergency Operations Center. We need to ask you about your niece Sarah. Is she on Transatlantic Airways Flight 1142 from Boston to Chicago today? Frank's hand tightened on the phone. Yes, he said. She's flying to visit her aunt for fall break. Why? What happened? It wasn't really a question. He already knew something was very wrong. Mr. Mills, both pilots on that flight have been incapacitated. Your niece has taken control of the aircraft. She identified herself as a pilot with significant flight time. She says you trained her. Frank sat down on the garage floor. Just sat down, right there on the oil-stained concrete, because his legs stopped working properly. Yes, he said. I trained her. Can you confirm her experience level? Asterisk 190 hours. Cessna 172. 3 years of training. She is, asterisk his voice did something he couldn't stop, she is very good. She is genuinely very good. Mr. Mills, we need you on the radio with her. Immediately. Can you get to a phone? He was already moving. The patch-through took 4 minutes. 4 minutes during which Frank Mills drove, at a speed that would have resulted in multiple traffic violations if any officer had been watching, to the airport. To the hangar. To the radio he kept mounted on the workbench. The FAA technician on the phone talked him through the connection. Then he heard his niece's voice. She was talking to someone else, the airline training captain they had gotten on the line, a woman named Captain Sarah Doyle, who was walking Sarah through the 737's electrical systems with the focused patience of someone who had spent 12 years teaching pilots. Sarah was answering questions. Describing what she saw on the overhead panel. Reading numbers back. Asking clarifying questions. Her voice was steady. Frank put his head down on the workbench for 3 seconds. Then he picked up the mic. Sarah. This is Uncle Frank. Do you copy? A pause. And then, and he would hear this for the rest of his life, a breath. A single, shaky breath. Uncle Frank. I'm here, kiddo. I'm right here. I stopped the descent. The autopilot is holding altitude. Captain Doyle has been helping me with the electrical panel. We've isolated 2 of the damaged circuits. The smoke is getting a little better. He closed his eyes. She had isolated the damaged circuits. At 11 years old. In an aircraft she had never flown. She had isolated the damaged circuits. You did good, he said. You did exactly right. Now we're going to work on getting you down. Together. 1 step at a time. Just like we always do. Okay, she said. You scared? A pause. Yes. Good. Fear means you're paying attention. Now let's work. She had been in a simulator debrief when they pulled her out. The operations manager hadn't explained in the hallway. Just said, I need you in the ops center. Now. It's serious. Serious, she had learned, was an understatement. She had stared at the flight data on the screen for 30 seconds. Both pilots incapacitated. A passenger had taken control. A child. She had put on a headset without another word. She had been talking to Sarah for 22 minutes before Frank Mills came on the line. In those 22 minutes, she had established two things. First, Sarah was genuinely skilled. She asked the right questions. She followed instructions precisely. When Doyle described the location of a circuit breaker, Sarah found it immediately and described exactly what she saw without embellishment. She was not guessing. She was not performing. She was working. Second, Sarah was operating at the absolute edge of what her training had prepared her for. The Cessna 172 that Sarah had trained in was to the Boeing 737 what a bicycle was to a motorcycle. The basic principles were the same. The execution was different in every way that mattered. Different weight. Different speed. Different systems. Different everything. Sarah could fly. The question was whether she could land this specific aircraft, at this specific weight, on a specific runway, under pressure, with 222 lives behind her. Doyle had talked through emergency landings many times in simulators. She had never talked an 11-year-old through one in a real aircraft. She put that thought away. It wasn't useful. Sarah, she said, let's talk about what the landing is going to look like. The decision was made at the Operations Center, Chicago O'Hare, runway 28R. Longest runway at O'Hare. 13,000 feet. Wide. Well lit. Every emergency vehicle the airport had was already rolling. Sarah was 94 miles out when they gave her the information. She looked at the navigation display. Doyle had talked her through reading it, the magenta line showing the programmed route, the distance indicator, the ground speed. 13,000 feet of runway, Sarah said quietly, repeating it back. That's right, Doyle said. That's longer than most runways you've ever seen. You'll have room. Plenty of room. Frank's voice, remember the first time we landed at Worcester? That runway is 7,000 feet and you stopped with half of it left. Sarah almost smiled. That's different. This aircraft weighs 80 tons. The principles don't change, Frank said. The numbers are different but the principles are the same. You know the principles. At 28,000 feet, Doyle began walking Sarah through the descent configuration. Speed reduction. Flap extension, each stage, each lever position, each new sensation as the aircraft's handling changed. Sarah described everything she felt and saw. Doyle confirmed or corrected. Behind Sarah, Karen Wells and Michael Torres had positioned Captain Morris in the observer seat and secured him. James Parker was on the cockpit floor, his breathing steady, the blood on his temple dried to a dark line. A passenger who was a nurse, a woman named Dr. Helen Bradley in row 8, had come forward to monitor both men. Helen had looked at Sarah when she first came into the cockpit. She had not said anything. She had simply checked the pilot's vital signs, confirmed both were stable, and said, "What do you need from me?" "Just keep them stable," Sarah said. Helen had nodded and done exactly that. At 22,000 feet, Sarah could see the ground below through breaks in the cloud layer. The flat geometry of the Midwest. Roads and fields and towns laid out in the way flat land allows. She had never been this high and this alone with a decision this large. "Sarah," Frank said. He knew her. He could hear something in the small shifts in her breathing. "Talk to me." "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "that if I get the flare wrong." "Don't," Frank said. Not harshly. Gently. "Don't go there. Stay here. What's your altitude right now?" 21,400. "And your descent rate?" She checked. 1,600 feet per minute. "Is that what Doyle told you to hold?" Between 1,500 and 2,000. Yes. So you're doing it right. You're not guessing. You're not hoping. You're executing correctly. Focus on what's in front of you. At 15,000 feet, two F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared off the right wing. Sarah saw them through the cockpit window. Sleek and gray, close enough that she could see the details of the airframe. A voice on the radio, Transatlantic 1142, this is Viper Flight. We're with you. We're going to stay with you all the way to the runway. Sarah looked at the F-16 for a moment. The pilot was looking back at her through the cockpit. She could see the helmet. The visor. The pilot gave a thumbs up. She turned back to her instruments. Thank you, she said into the radio. You're doing fine, the F-16 pilot said. Better than fine. At 10,000 feet, Chicago appeared. Sarah had flown to Chicago once with Frank, a day trip in the Cessna to get lunch near Midway and practice the approach. She knew what the city looked like from the air. She found O'Hare. The runways were lit even in daylight, every light the airport had was on. She could see the emergency vehicles on the ground, small as toys from this altitude, arranged along the runway edges. She could see runway 28R. She focused on it. Sarah, Doyle said, at 1,000 feet you're going to disconnect the autopilot and hand-fly the final approach and landing. I want to tell you what it's going to feel like. Okay. The aircraft is going to feel heavy. Much heavier than the Cessna. When you pull back for the flare, you're going to need to use more force than you expect. Don't be surprised by that. Expect it and work with it. How much more? It was exactly the right question. Doyle had expected her to just say okay. The question told her something important. 3 to 4 times more input than you're used to. The aircraft will respond, but slowly. You start the flare earlier than you think you need to. I'll call it out for you. At 30 feet, I'll say flare, and you pull back. Not hard, steady and firm. 30 feet, Sarah repeated. Steady and firm. That's right. Frank came on, and don't fixate on the nose. Look at the far end of the runway. Where do you look on landing in the Cessna? Down the runway. Not at the nose. Same here. At 8 miles out, Sarah extended the landing gear. The sound it made, the heavy mechanical thunk, 3 times, the vibration through the airframe, the change in drag, was nothing like the Cessna's fixed gear. 3 green lights appeared on the panel. Gear down and locked, Doyle confirmed, watching the data at the operations center. Good, Sarah. That's good. 6 miles. 4,000 feet altitude. Sarah could see the runway numbers now. 28 are white against the gray concrete. Flaps 30, Doyle said. Full landing flaps. Sarah moved the lever. The aircraft slowed. The nose wanted to drop. She held it with back pressure. 5 miles. 3,000 feet. Your speed? 149 knots. Target is 145. Reduce slightly. She eased back on the throttles. 147, 146. 145. Good. Hold that. 4 miles. 2,000 feet. The runway was close now. Real. No longer an abstraction on a navigation display. A real strip of concrete at the end of a real approach. 222 people behind her. She pushed the thought down. Not away, she didn't push it away, because Frank had taught her you didn't pretend stakes weren't real. You acknowledged them and then you set them beside you and did the work. She did the work. 3 miles. 1,500 feet. Chicago Center, Beth Lawson's voice. Transatlantic 1142, you are cleared to land runway 28R. Wind is 260 at 11 knots. You are the only aircraft in Chicago airspace. The runway is yours. Cleared to land, Sarah repeated. 2 miles. 1,000 feet. Sarah, Doyle said. Disconnect the autopilot. Sarah's hand moved to the disconnect button. She pressed it. The aircraft was in her hands. All of it. Every pound of it. The weight came through the yoke immediately, heavier than she had expected even after being told to expect it. The aircraft wanted to settle, wanted to descend faster, wanted to drift right in the crosswind. She held it. Both hands on the yoke. Feet on the rudder pedals. Every input small and deliberate. Looking good, the F-16 pilot said. He was alongside her, slightly above and to the right, watching. Looking very good. 1 mile. 500 feet. The runway filled the windshield. She could see the touchdown zone markings. The centerline stripe. Stay on centerline, Frank said. His voice was very quiet. Left rudder, just a touch. There you go. 400 feet. The ground was rising toward her. The way it always rose, the same optical illusion in every aircraft, the way the runway seemed to come up while you went down. 300 feet. Throttles back slightly, Doyle said. Idle is coming. Sarah eased the throttles back. 200 feet. She could see the pavement texture now. The painted marks. The emergency trucks lined up on both sides, lights going, all of them waiting. 100 feet. Ready, Doyle said. Steady. Steady. 50 feet. Now, Sarah. Flare. Steady and firm. Sarah pulled back on the yoke. It was heavier than anything she had ever felt. Like pulling against the aircraft's own weight, like trying to lift the nose of something that didn't want to be lifted. She pulled harder. The nose came up. The descent slowed. 30 feet. 20 feet. The main landing gear touched the runway. Not smooth. There was a thud, she felt it in her spine, in her hands, in her teeth, and then a skip, a brief return to the air, and then down again. Firm. Solid. The nose gear came down. She pulled the thrust reversers. The engines roared with a sound she had never heard at this proximity, a physical force pressing her back into the seat. She pressed the brakes. Gently at first, the way Frank had drilled into her, never grab at the brakes, press them, steady pressure, steady. The aircraft decelerated. 160 knots. 130, 100. 80. The end of the runway was visible ahead. Far away. Still plenty of room. 60 knots. The aircraft stopped. For a moment there was no sound in the cockpit except the engine spooling down and the wind against the fuselage. Sarah sat in the captain's seat. Her hands were still on the yoke. She became aware, slowly, that they were shaking. Both of them. Trembling against the yoke. She let them. Karen Wells came through the cockpit door. She had been standing in the doorway for the last 3 minutes of the approach, watching, not making a sound. She walked to Sarah and put both hands on the girl's shoulders. She didn't say anything. Sarah looked at her. We stopped, Sarah said. We stopped, Karen agreed. Outside, the emergency vehicles were surrounding the aircraft. Fire trucks. Ambulances. Police vehicles. Airport operations trucks. The radio was erupting with voices. Beth Lawson at Chicago Center was talking to the operations center. Doyle was still on the frequency. Then Frank's voice cut through. He said only, "That's my girl." Sarah's face crumpled. She pressed her hand over her eyes and cried, not the careful, controlled kind, but the real kind, the kind that had been stored up for the entire flight, the kind that came from 222 people trusting their lives to an 11-year-old girl and that girl not letting them down. Karen kept her hands on Sarah's shoulders. Let her cry. The passengers came off the aircraft not knowing. The cabin crew had told them there had been a serious emergency with the pilots and that a qualified individual had brought the aircraft in safely. They had not said who. When the door opened and people started filing out onto the jet bridge, they were shaken, tearful, grateful in the way people are when they have been very close to something and come through it. A man in a business suit, row 7, he had been on his way to a meeting, stopped a gate agent. Who landed the plane? He asked. Who was it? The gate agent didn't answer. 20 minutes later, when Sarah came off the aircraft, after the paramedics had taken Morris and Parker, after the investigators had arrived, after Karen had walked with her through everything that needed to happen, she stepped into the gate area. There were still passengers there. Some had refused to leave. They had waited. When they saw her, this small girl in a green hoodie with an orange unaccompanied minor sticker still on her jacket, there was a moment of confusion. Then the businessman from row 7 understood. He looked at the sticker on her jacket. He looked at her age. He looked at Karen, who was beside her. Is this, he started. Karen nodded. The businessman sat down heavily in a gate chair. You're a child, he said. Sarah looked at him. I know. You landed that plane. Yes. He put his face in his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. I have 3 kids at home, he said. 8, 10, and 12. I'm going to see them tonight because of you. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She never did, afterward, know what to say to the gratitude. It embarrassed her in a way she couldn't explain. She had done what needed doing. She didn't know how to accept credit for that. I'm glad, she said finally. I'm glad you get to go home. He arrived at O'Hare 4 hours after the landing. The FAA had arranged transport, a regional airline employee had driven him to Logan, and a carrier had given him the first available seat to Chicago. Sarah was in a conference room at the airline's operations facility when he walked in. She was sitting in a chair that was too big for her, drinking hot chocolate that had gone cold, answering the questions of a very patient FAA investigator who had been talking with her for 2 hours. When Frank came through the door, Sarah stood up. She crossed the room and he met her halfway. He hugged her the way he had when she first arrived at his house, with a suitcase and a logbook and no words. The same hug. Full and certain. I'm sorry I told them about the flying, Sarah said into his jacket. Don't be, he said. Don't you dare be. They know it was illegal. I know. Are you going to be in trouble? Frank pulled back. Looked at her. His eyes were red. She noticed that. She had never seen Frank cry and she didn't see it now. He had gotten it out of the way before he got here, she understood that, but the redness was there. Probably, he said. I don't care. I care. I know you do. But Sarah, he held her shoulders the way he always did when he needed her to hear something 222 people went home today. You did that. Whatever happens to me because of the flying, it doesn't matter. Those people went home. Sarah was quiet. Your dad, Frank said. And he stopped. Cleared his throat. Your dad would have. He stopped again. Sarah finished it for him. I know, she said. He found her at the gate 2 hours after landing. He was still in his flight suit. The F-16s had been cleared to land at O'Hare while the investigation sorted itself out. He had walked from the military parking area specifically to find her. He was tall. 43 years old. He had a regulation haircut and the kind of sun-damaged face that came from years of flying with the canopy above you. Sarah Mills. She looked up. I'm Major Tom Bradley. I was flying escort in the F-16 on your right side. I saw you, she said. You gave me a thumbs up. You needed it. He paused. I did some research while I was waiting to land. I looked up Mills Aviation. He touched the patch on her sleeve. Your father was Robert Mills. Sarah went still. I crossed paths with him once, Bradley said. A bush pilot support operation in Alaska, 8 years ago. I was doing some coordinated exercises up there. He flew supply support for a week. Good pilot. Really good pilot. He paused. Very calm. Never seemed rattled. Even when things got complicated. Sarah looked at him. You have the same thing, Bradley said. Whatever that is, that calm. You have it. He extended his hand. She shook it. Your father would be proud, he said. And for the first time since she had walked off that aircraft, Sarah Mills cried in front of someone who wasn't Frank. She turned her face away. Tried to stop. Bradley didn't move. Didn't look away. Didn't pretend he hadn't seen. When she turned back, he was still there. I know, he said quietly. I know. Administrator Patricia Reynolds held a press conference 3 days later. She was direct. Frank Mills taught his niece to fly illegally. This is a fact. Federal aviation regulations do not permit student pilots under the age of 16, and the instruction provided to Sarah Mills violated multiple provisions of FAR Part 61. She paused. Sarah Mills used that illegal instruction to save 222 lives. The FAA has reviewed this matter extensively. We have consulted with our legal team, our safety division, and external aviation experts. Our conclusion is this: while we cannot and do not endorse violations of federal aviation regulations, we are not going to prosecute a man whose decision, whatever its legal status, resulted in 222 people going home to their families. A reporter called out, "What about Sarah?" Sarah Mills, Reynolds said, will receive the FAA's Award for Aviation Safety, our highest civilian honor. When she reaches the age of 16, she will be offered a pathway to official pilot certification through a cooperative program between the FAA and Transatlantic Airways, who have offered to sponsor her training through her private, instrument, and commercial ratings. Reynolds paused. We look forward to the day she flies legally. The school paper interview was her best friend's idea. Jenna Park was 12 years old and editor of the Westfield Middle School Courier, a 4-page monthly that usually covered lunch menu changes and soccer scores. She had called Sarah the night after everything happened and said, "You have to let me interview you. You have to. It has to be me and not some news person." Sarah had said yes. They sat in Sarah's bedroom at Frank's house. Jenna had a notebook and a pen and a list of questions she had written out in advance, which Sarah found touching. "Were you scared?" "Yes. The whole time. But Uncle Frank taught me that fear is just your body taking the situation seriously. It's useful. You use it and you keep working." What was the hardest part? Sarah thought. The flare. The moment right before touchdown when you pull back on the yoke. In the Cessna it's light. On the 737 it was like trying to lift something you weren't sure you were strong enough to lift. For a second I wasn't sure I had it. But you did. I did. What do you want people to know about all of this? Sarah thought about that one for a long time. My dad taught me to love flying, she said finally. Not to be impressive. Not to be special. Just, because it was honest. When you're flying, the aircraft doesn't care how old you are or how small you are. It just responds to what you do. If you do the right things, it flies. If you don't, it doesn't. It's honest. And I want people to know that those 222 people, they weren't just numbers. I saw some of them. A man going home to 3 kids. A nurse who stayed calm and helped the pilots. A lot of people who were scared but didn't panic. She paused. They were good. The people on that flight were good. I just helped them get home. Jenna wrote it down. She was a good journalist. She didn't say anything to fill the silence. One more question, she said. Okay. Are you going to keep flying? Sarah looked out the window of her room. The sky was overcast. A gray October afternoon. Ask me something harder, she said. 2 weeks after the landing, Sarah and Frank drove to the airport. The Cessna 172 was in the hangar where they had left it. Frank had done a full pre-flight inspection the day before. Oil. Fuel. Control surfaces. Everything checked. Sarah walked around the aircraft the way Frank had taught her. She touched the wing strut. Checked the elevator. Looked at the propeller. The aircraft was old. The paint was faded. The interior smelled like oil and old leather and the specific smell that small aircraft have, familiar as a kitchen. Ready? Frank asked. Sarah climbed in. She adjusted the seat, not to its maximum position, just to where she needed it. She knew this cockpit. She knew where everything was without looking. Frank started the engine from the right seat. The propeller turned. Sarah wrapped her hands around the yoke. Yours, Frank said. She taxied to the runway. Checked her controls. Checked the windsock. She pushed the throttle forward. The Cessna accelerated down the runway, the familiar sound, the familiar feeling of the aircraft getting light on its wheels. She pulled back. They lifted. The ground fell away. The sky opened up, gray today, with cloud layers at 3,000 feet, a soft autumn light coming through. Sarah climbed through it. At 2,500 feet she leveled off below the clouds. The world stretched out on all sides, the fields and roads and small towns of western Massachusetts, the hills going brown and red with October. She thought about her father. She always thought about him up here. Not with the sharp grief of the early years, something different now. Something more like conversation. Like he was in the right seat instead of Frank. She thought about the 737. The weight of it in her hands. The runway coming up. The moment the wheels touched and held. She thought about 222 people going home. How does it feel? Frank asked. He always asked her that. Sarah looked at the horizon. At the sky. Like home, she said. Frank didn't say anything. He knew. They flew until the light changed, until the clouds turned pink and then gray and the airport beacon started blinking below them. Sarah flew the pattern herself. Turned final. Crossed the fence. Set the aircraft down on the grass runway without a bounce. Rolled to a stop. Shut down the engine. The propeller ticked to a stop. Silence. Same time Saturday? Frank asked. Sarah looked at him. Same time Saturday, she said. She climbed out of the aircraft and stood on the grass. Above her, the last light was leaving the sky. She watched it go. She was 11 years old. She had 191 hours. She had an FAA award she didn't know where to put, a school newspaper article that her friend had written with complete seriousness, and a patch on her sleeve that said Mills Aviation in cracked iron-on letters. She had her father's logbook in her bag. She had 222 people who had gone home. She had the sky. That was enough. That was more than enough. Captain David Morris and First Officer James Parker both recovered fully from carbon monoxide poisoning. Morris returned to flying 8 months later. Parker was back in the air in 4 months. Transatlantic Airways installed dual carbon monoxide detectors in all cockpits across its fleet within 6 months of the incident. The FAA made such detectors mandatory on all commercial aircraft the following year. Frank Mills received a formal FAA citation for violation of federal aviation regulations. No criminal charges were filed. He continues to fly. Sarah Mills received her private pilot certificate at age 16. She is currently working toward her instrument rating. She still flies the old Cessna 172 on weekends. She is still working on the landings. She always is.